I'm going to talk about Vermeer's young woman standing at the Virginal, one of the most celebrated pictures in the National Gallery. Many works by Vermeer show figures engaged in some sort of activity in an interior, and in more than a quarter of Vermeer's very small oeuvre of only some 35 pictures, that activity is making music. Now, some of Vermeer's works with music-related themes are decidedly introvert. For example, we see figures who are totally absorbed in their musical performance and are therefore entirely oblivious to us, the viewer. By contrast, other pictures by the artist are unequivocally extrovert, with the protagonist looking straight at us. This is very much the case in Vermeer's Young Woman Standing at the Virginal in the National Gallery, which the artist painted in the early 1670s towards the end of his life. But before we explore what we see and why this woman is so emphatically looking at us, let's have a closer look at how the picture was painted. And the first detail I would like to draw your attention to is what is no more than a narrow vertical stroke with a brush loaded with bluish-grey paint that conveys how light catches the inner edge of the black frame hanging on the back wall in the background of Vermeer's painting. We do not question its sudden bright appearance. In fact, it is such an inconspicuous detail that we may overlook it entirely. But, as with so many details in Vermeer's paintings, it subliminally informs our understanding of how this three-dimensional object, as well as the interior space it occupies, is defined by the distribution of light. The frame in question casts a double shadow on the wall, captured by the artist in perfectly judged shades of grey, and we see a similar double shadow cast by the gilt picture frame to the left, as well as lower down underneath the windowsill, where the effect extends to subtle differences in the intensity of light reaching the marble floor further below. Equally delicate is the area around the keyboard of the Virginal, the various edges of the instrument forming a mesmerizing interplay of horizontals that remain in shadow and receding diagonals that catch the light. Such beautifully observed and captured details are a delight by themselves, but are also part of a spellbinding symphony of shapes and colors on a more abstract level. The distribution of forms and color across the composition is in fact as crucial as the distribution of light across the interior. If we turn our attention back to the black picture frame, our eyes find a match for it in a narrow black line along the outer edge of the lid of the Virginal. This lid, and the landscape painted on it, recedes in steep foreshortening towards the back wall, its diagonal lines counterbalancing the square shapes of the picture frames on the wall, while at the same time echoing the obliquely receding lines of the window opposite. Vermeer's colors, meanwhile, are arranged like recurring musical motifs. The blue of the upholstery of the chair, for example, is echoed in the blue in the woman's dress and the skies in the painted landscapes on the Virginal and back wall, and finding a faint resonance even in the inner edge of the black frame we looked at earlier. We can admire the subtle shades that give volume to the woman's head, as much as Vermeer's choice to allow her head to overlap the painting behind her, something a lesser artist would perhaps have avoided for the sake of clarity. It serves the composition both in terms of delusion of depth and in the way it contributes to the configuration of shapes, in this case allowing the human form of the woman standing in the interior to connect with that of the Cupid depicted in the framed painting, to which I shall return in a moment. Related to the matter of overlap is Vermeer's choice to crop certain elements of the composition. We see how a slightly obliquely placed chair in the foreground, close to the viewer looking at the picture, is cut off by the edge of the picture plane. The introduction of an object in the foreground to lead the eye into the scene and create an illusion of depth is traditional enough, and most painters use the device. But Vermeer's contemporaries nevertheless often treated interior scenes as if they take place on a stage, with the elements that make up the composition usually visible in their entirety rather than cut off. Vermeer, on the other hand, approaches such things in much the same way as a modern photographer might, allowing accidental objects to jut into the scene from beyond the edge of the picture plane. Because we are so used to photographic images, it is easy to overlook how revolutionary Vermeer's choice was. His artistic achievement lies, among many other things, in the realization that he could stage manage a scene without necessarily fully documenting every object. The insight, as we would say today, that less is more. Similarly, the need to convince the viewer has not led to a minute description of details. The glistening molding of the gilt frame is merely suggested using tiny dabs of paint, as are the pearls around the woman's neck and many of the details in her dress and hair. The Delft tiles receding along the wall at lower left show ever so many abstract shapes rather than identifiable scenes. The veins in the white marble next to them are only summarily indicated. And yet the sum total of this painting is completely convincing. It is comparable to how the human eye does not need to perceive everything it sees in equally sharp detail to get a wholly convincing impression of the whole. It seems none of Vermeer's contemporaries understood such matters of perception as well as he did. It is here that I need to introduce another picture by Vermeer in the gallery's collection, showing a young woman seated at a Virginal. Bar a few millimeters, it has the exact same dimensions. The two works please in their juxtaposition of opposites. In one the woman is standing, while in the other she is seated. In one she is facing right, while in the other she is facing left. In one she is seen in full daylight coming in from the windows, while in the other she is in a more dimly lit interior because the window shutters are closed. In both pictures, Vermeer introduces objects very near to the viewer that are cut off by the picture plane. In this second work, that object is a viola da gamba in the lower left corner. These objects are placed in such a way that they echo each other across the divide in perfect symmetry between the two pictures. So the question that presents itself is whether these two pictures are in fact pendants. But we can be pretty certain that they are, because technical examination has established that the canvas supports of both pictures are cut from one and the same bolt of cloth. This means that canvas supports for the two pictures were almost certainly prepared for use at exactly the same time. There is, however, so much more to these pictures than the mostly formal qualities I have discussed. It seems that the chair and viola da gamba are not just there to create a pleasing composition. There is another dimension to them, because their position close to us suggests that the probably male viewer is invited to join these young women in their musical pursuits, perhaps to participate in a duet. And from there it is only a small step to understand music as a metaphor for harmony, and by extension for the harmonious love between man and woman. It is very likely that this is indeed central to the meaning of the National Gallery pictures. It is here that we should return our attention again to the painting on the back wall in Young Woman Standing at the Virginal. This painting within the painting should almost certainly be understood as a comment on the scene in front of it. The painting in the background depicts Cupid, the god of desire, love, attraction, and affection, who is always depicted as a chubby winged child, his attributes the bow and arrow, because whoever is shot by Cupid's arrow is subsequently filled with desire. Here he is striding forward while leaning on his bow. The general message conveyed by Cupid is anyhow hard to miss. We can be quite certain that his message of love is a comment on what is alluded to in the foreground in the invitation to participate in a duet with the woman standing at the Virginal. There is one more category of paintings within paintings we should look at, and they are the landscapes we see on the Virginal's lid and in the picture in the gilt frame on the back wall. Only some 30 years ago it was established that both these landscapes closely resemble an existing painting by the Delft artist Pieter Groenewegen. As for the question whether we can also attach a specific meaning to these landscapes in the context of this painting, well, the jury is out, although there can be little doubt that their idyllic nature strikes a congruous chord in the harmonious world of love that Vermeer evokes in this brilliantly conceived work.